Oskar Gross and the Tournament of Candidates. Chapter 1. Ashes and Dawn. The spirit endures beyond the body, but the body without spirit is nothing. Order of Illidari, Doctrine 1. Episode 1. He didn't know it yet, but this would be the last morning the world remembered peace. The air above Paramir, a small border town, felt unnaturally still, too heavy, too quiet. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm no one can yet foresee. As always, people hurried through the streets, to work, to school, to the shops. Yet something about the familiar rhythm felt wrong. The rumble of buses, the conversations of passers-by, even the birdsong carried an invisible tension, as though the entire world had stopped to hold its breath. By the time Oskar stepped into his classroom, the unease had already settled deep inside him. He was a few minutes late. The lesson had already begun. Quietly taking his seat, he tried to focus on the teacher's voice, but his thoughts kept drifting toward the strange silence beyond the windows. He glanced at his classmates. Their eyes mirrored the same feeling growing inside him, a fear that had nothing to do with exams, grades, or ordinary school life. Then it came. A low, broken rumble somewhere in the distance. Not thunder, not machinery. An explosion. The walls of the school shuddered violently. A few seconds later, another blast struck, much closer. A brilliant flash lit the windows, followed by a shockwave powerful enough to make every desk tremble. For one suspended heartbeat, the classroom froze. Then screams erupted throughout the building. The teacher reacted first.
"Everyone to the basement, now!"
she shouted, her voice breaking. Chairs scraped across the floor. Books tumbled from desks. Panic spread instantly. Students rushed toward the doorway, pushing and stumbling over one another in desperate attempts to escape first. Oskar's heart pounded wildly, yet his mind remained strangely clear. He could already see how this would end. A stampede, chaos, people getting hurt.
"Stop! Don't push! One at a time. We'll get out faster if everyone stays calm."
There was something in his voice, steady, confident, that broke through the panic. It was enough. The students slowed. One after another, they began filing into the corridor in a more orderly line. Oskar waved the younger students forward, allowing the girls to pass first while making sure no one was left behind. The school was a large 3-story building filled with children ranging from 6-year-olds to 17-year-old seniors. Streams of frightened students poured through every hallway and staircase at once. Together with several older classmates, Oskar stayed behind to help the teachers guide the younger children safely toward the shelter instead of rushing ahead himself. Another explosion shook the stairwell. A deep roar rolled somewhere overhead. By the time Oskar entered the shelter, one of the last to arrive, the basement was already overflowing. Hundreds of students of every age crowded together alongside teachers and parents who had managed to reach the school from nearby streets. The air smelled of dust, damp concrete, and fear. Some children cried quietly. Others sat in stunned silence, pale-faced, clutching their phones as though they could still reach the world outside. The explosions continued above them. Each blast struck like a hammer against the earth. The walls trembled. The lights flickered. Almost no one spoke. Time itself seemed to stretch. Every minute felt like an hour. Oskar checked his phone. No signal. He raised it higher. He moved closer to the stairwell. Still nothing. Then the phone vibrated.
Son, are you all right?
His mother's voice broke through the static.
Mom, I'm okay. We're in the school basement. Everything's shaking, but we're safe for now. Where are you? I'm worried about you.
Don't worry about me.
Victoria replied quickly.
I'm in a shelter beneath our office building.
She took a breath.
Listen to your teachers, Oskar. Whatever happens, don't go outside. Promise me.
I promise.
He hesitated.
So, yesterday's news was true after all.
Yes.
She answered softly.
It was just so hard to believe.
For a moment, neither of them spoke.
My brave boy. I love you.
The floor lurched beneath them. Dust rained from the ceiling. The phone slipped from Oskar's hand. The connection died. Silence. He picked up the phone immediately and stared at the dark screen for several long seconds, hoping it would light up again. It never did. Around him, the shelter slowly filled with whispers, quiet prayers, and muffled sobs. More people continued descending into the basement. Neighbors, parents, complete strangers. Every face carried the same expression. Empty, terrified, lost. And for the first time in his life, Oskar understood. The world he had always known was gone. The air smelled of dust, damp concrete, and fear. Oskar's heartbeat was finally beginning to slow. The rush of adrenaline faded, leaving behind an unfamiliar emptiness, a cold silence that echoed somewhere deep inside his chest. The silence itself became unbearable. For one brief moment, he felt something greater than fear. It was as if the world had lost its soul. Only now was he beginning to understand what had truly happened. War. The word belonged in history books, not here, not in his life. He leaned against the cold brick wall, closed his eyes, and reached for the only place that still felt real. Just 2 days earlier, he had turned 17. His mother, Victoria, had baked his favorite strawberry cheesecake. They had sat together at their small kitchen table while candlelight flickered softly against the window. When it was time to blow out the candles, Oskar made a wish. Not for money, not for success. He wished to see the world, to visit every continent, to travel all the way around the globe. For a fleeting moment, he could almost taste the sweetness of the cheesecake again. The memory lingered, warm, peaceful, painfully alive. And that was exactly what made it hurt. It belonged to a world that no longer existed. Reality had always felt smaller than his dreams. Money, school, daily responsibilities, and the invisible borders of a quiet town on the edge of the country. His dreams had remained exactly what they had always been: beautiful, fragile, and impossibly far away. Yet it wasn't his birthday he remembered most. It was the day after. He and his mother had stayed home. The air had felt strangely heavy then, too, as though something unseen had settled over the town. Every news channel repeated the same headlines: growing political tension, troop movements, warnings that the conflict along the border could soon escalate. Outside, neighbors gathered in small groups near the apartment buildings, speaking in hushed voices. Some took the reports seriously. A few even talked about leaving town for a couple of weeks until everything settled down. Others simply laughed. "We're friends. Nothing's going to happen. It's all just politics." Everyone had an explanation, but no one could explain the feeling. Unease slipped quietly into every home like a cold draft beneath a closed window. Even Grom, the family's loyal German shepherd, sensed it. He barely touched his food. He hid in the bathroom. Sometimes he would suddenly bark at an empty corner, staring into the silence as though someone invisible stood there. Victoria would kneel beside him, gently stroking his fur. "It's going to be all right," she would whisper. But Oskar remembered the look in Grom's eyes. Restless, alert, as if he could already hear footsteps that no one else could. Now, sitting in the darkness of the shelter, those memories felt impossibly distant. Not like moments from his own life, but like memories borrowed from someone else. A life that had disappeared in a single night. A distant roar cut through the silence, pulling Oskar back to reality. A supersonic aircraft tore across the sky above Paramir. Its thunder rolled over the city like a warning no one could escape. Seconds later, the explosions returned. Deep, heavy, unrelenting. The lights overhead flickered once, then went out. With them, the last trace of warmth disappeared. The shelter sank into darkness. Only quiet prayers broke the silence. Someone whispered that the missiles had struck the power plant, the one that supplied electricity to the entire city. By evening, the basement had grown bitterly cold. Moisture crept across the concrete walls. People wrapped themselves in jackets and blankets, drawing closer together in search of warmth. But it wasn't the cold they feared most. It was the unknown. No one knew what was happening above them. Oskar thought of his mother again. She was somewhere out there, somewhere in the same city, beneath the same sky that was now being torn apart by explosions. From time to time, distant gunfire echoed through the night. Every few minutes, he tried calling her again, and again, and again. Each attempt ended the same way. Sometimes he heard 3 short beeps. Sometimes there was nothing at all. With every unanswered call, something inside him grew quieter, emptier. Near nightfall, volunteers arrived. They had risked their lives to reach the shelter. They carried large bottles of drinking water and crates filled with food. Many local shop owners had opened their stores without hesitation, donating everything they could to the places where help was needed most. The volunteers moved almost silently, as though afraid that even the smallest sound might shatter the fragile peace still holding the shelter together. Children reached toward them with trembling hands. Some cried quietly. Others simply stared. It wasn't enough. It couldn't be. But even that small act of kindness gave people something they desperately needed. Hope. Fragile, almost invisible, but hope nonetheless. Above them, the city continued to fall apart. Not only buildings, lives. Flames burst through shattered windows. The missiles showed no mercy. Soldiers and civilians alike became victims. That night divided every life into two parts: before and after. Oskar never managed to fall asleep. Wrapped tightly in his jacket, he remained against the cold wall, staring into the darkness above. His body trembled until exhaustion finally overcame him. Sleep washed over him like a slow ocean wave. And then, the sea. Oskar stood on a quiet wooden pier beneath a pale, overcast sky. Gentle waves rolled lazily onto the shore, whispering secrets only the sea could understand. His father was there, Oskar Gross, tall, broad-shouldered, the same calm green-gray eyes Oskar remembered so well. Everything felt real, more real than reality itself. Alexander stepped forward and embraced his son. Then, without a word, he raised a hand and pointed toward a narrow path disappearing into the unknown. For a while, they simply walked together in silence. The only sound was the sea. At last, Alexander spoke. His voice was calm, wise, exactly as Oskar remembered from his earliest childhood.
"I'm sorry,"
he said quietly,
"for being away so often, for leaving you too soon."
For a moment, his voice faltered. Then something else appeared within it. Pride. Pride in the son who had been forced to grow up far too soon. Pride that he had cared for his mother. Pride that fear had never broken him.
"You've grown into a good man, my son,"
Alexander said softly.
"a far better man than I was at your age. But it's too soon for you to follow me. You still have your own path to walk."
Oskar wanted to ask him what he meant.
Too soon. Follow you where? Why are you here?
But the questions never reached his lips. The pier slowly disappeared into drifting mist. Alexander stopped and turned toward the open sea. The wind lifted the hem of his long coat.
"We'll meet again, my dear son,"
he said with a gentle smile.
"but not now. Go your own way, and trust your inner voice. It will guide you through every dream."
He took one final step into the sea. A silver wave rose before him, catching the pale light for a single breathtaking moment. Then it swallowed him completely.
"Dad!"
Oskar cried out. His eyes flew open as he gasped for air. For several long seconds, he couldn't remember where he was. The sound of the waves still echoed inside his mind. His father's voice. The whisper of the sea. The dream refused to let him go. Slowly, he lowered his hands to the floor. Cold concrete. Solid. Real. He was still there. Still inside the shelter. The endless underground corridor that felt more and more like a tunnel with no way out. A new day dawned, but it brought no relief. The shelling never stopped. Warplanes continued circling above Paramir, their engines roaring across the sky. Even those who had once loved aviation now feared the sound. Little by little, fear drained the last strength from those still trying to hold on. Yet people kept searching for a way to survive. Those whose cars still worked fled toward nearby villages, hoping the fighting hadn't reached them yet. Others drove toward distant cities, desperate to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the front line. Not everyone made it. The circle around Paramir was tightening. Civilian cars were struck more and more often. In a single day, everything people valued had changed forever. Everyone who survived became someone else. Fear settled into everyday life as naturally as morning news once had, as naturally as school lessons. Grief turned ordinary people into shadows of themselves. Through the shelters, names of the dead spread in whispers. Neighbors, friends, classmates. Paramir was no longer a city. It had become a living hell. After a brief silence, another air raid began. A strike aircraft swept low over the streets, forcing everyone caught outside to run for cover. One missile after another slammed into the city. Military bases, warehouses, office buildings, gas stations, homes. The same streets Oskar had walked to school only days before now looked like scenes from a nightmare. When the explosions finally faded, an unsettling silence followed. Oskar reached for his phone once more. He called his mother's number. Once, twice, 5 times, 10. No answer. Later that afternoon, the teachers returned to the shelter after helping the volunteers unload supplies. From across the room, they kept glancing toward Oskar, quietly speaking among themselves. Something was wrong. Very wrong. His homeroom teacher, Lyudmila Vasilyevna, slowly walked toward him. She had always been respected, always cared for her students. As she drew closer, Oskar felt a knot tighten inside his chest. He already knew. Whatever she was about to say, it wasn't good news.
Oskar.
Her voice trembled with pain as she gently placed a hand on his shoulder.
I'm so sorry. The office building where your mother worked was hit. It completely collapsed. There are still people trapped beneath the rubble.
Oskar couldn't breathe. His phone slipped from his fingers onto the concrete floor. The world tilted. Sound, light, thought, everything merged into one endless ringing inside his ears. Someone called his name, but the words never reached him. The teachers gathered around him, trying to calm him. They told him rescue teams were already searching the ruins, that communication lines could still be down, that she might still be alive. But their voices came from somewhere impossibly far away, as though another world was speaking to him. A psychologist named Maria knelt beside him. She had been sheltering there with everyone else. Her voice remained calm, steady. She encouraged him to breathe, not to lose hope. Oskar nodded, but he barely heard a word. Inside him, everything was falling apart. Fragments of memory flashed before his eyes. His mother's laughter, her hands covered in flour while baking, the way she always looked out the window before every trip, the smell of strawberry cheesecake, sunlight shining through her hair. Oskar lowered his head and pulled his knees against his chest. He wanted to cry, but no tears came. The pain was simply too great. Another explosion shook the shelter overhead. The walls trembled. Oskar didn't move. He sat there in the darkness, holding his phone tightly against his chest, as though its warmth alone could somehow bring back his mother's voice. The next morning, the truth arrived. The rescuers still hadn't found Victoria Gross. Her office building had become nothing more than twisted steel and shattered concrete. People said she had most likely died beneath the rubble, along with everyone else. If someone hadn't been found within the first 24 hours, hope grew painfully small. For Oskar, those words struck deeper than anything he had ever known. He couldn't accept them. Not completely. Some part of him still believed she was alive, waiting, trying to call him. Somewhere close enough to reach, if only he could find her. Suddenly, Oskar jumped to his feet and rushed toward the shelter entrance. He had to help. He had to search the ruins himself. It wasn't reason. It was desperation. A desperate attempt to prove that his mother was still alive. Before he reached the door, a firm pair of hands stopped him. It was Vladimir Sergeyevich, the school's physical education teacher. For days he had been driving through the city, helping volunteers deliver humanitarian supplies. He looked Oskar straight in the eyes.
Oskar, stop. Don't go there. The rescuers and the military are already working. There's fighting at the entrance to the city. You won't save anyone, but you could lose your own life. Your mother wouldn't want that.
He picked up a cardboard box filled with fruit and sweets and placed it into Oskar's hands.
Keep your hands busy. It makes the pain a little easier to carry. Take these to the children.
Oskar looked down at the box, then slowly nodded. His anger faded into silence. From that day on, he could no longer sit still. Whenever a truck arrived, he helped unload supplies. He carried boxes, organized the shelter, helped wherever he was needed. Sometimes he accompanied Vladimir Sergeyevich upstairs to collect essential supplies from the school. One day, standing beside a broken window, Oskar looked out across the city. He barely recognized it. The streets he had once walked to school had become rivers of smoke, shattered glass, and broken concrete. With every passing day, the front line crept closer. People were losing more than their homes. They were losing one another. And safety had become nothing more than a rumor. A week passed. Life beneath the earth dissolved into an endless cycle of waiting. Waiting for aid, waiting for news, waiting for the next explosion. Each day blurred into the one before it, until time itself seemed to lose all meaning. Then, one morning, a whisper swept through the shelter. A humanitarian corridor had opened, only for a few hours, only for women and children. The teachers hurried through the crowded basement, gathering their students, explaining the evacuation, helping them pack what little they still had. Some children cried, unwilling to leave the only home they had ever known. Others clung to the news with desperate relief, believing the nightmare might finally be ending. Oskar refused, at first. He couldn't leave without knowing the truth. Somewhere deep inside him, a fragile spark of hope still refused to die. Against all reason, he believed there was still a chance his mother had survived. The hope was almost invisible, but it was enough to keep him there. That afternoon, the sky split open again. The shriek of a jet, a deafening impact, then another and another. The shelter lurched beneath them. New cracks raced across the concrete walls as chunks of plaster rained from the ceiling. The ground shook so violently that children began screaming, and even a few teachers could no longer hide the fear in their eyes. It felt as if the entire city were collapsing above them. That was the moment Oskar understood. If he stayed, he would die, and his death would change nothing. He wasn't afraid of dying anymore, not after everything that had happened. Fear itself had grown strangely distant. But for the first time since the war began, another thought entered his mind.
What comes after this?
If he died here, He would become one more victim in an endless list of names. Another life swallowed by war. Another name the world would eventually forget. The war would continue. People would keep dying. Nothing would change. Slowly, Oskar lowered himself onto his knees and placed both palms against the freezing concrete floor. There, in the silence beneath the ruined city, he made himself a promise. He would survive. Not to escape, not to forget, but to return. To return as a different man. A man capable of understanding why humanity kept destroying itself generation after generation. He didn't know the answer. He didn't know who was truly to blame. He didn't even know whether such madness could ever be stopped. But somewhere deep inside, he felt there had to be something greater behind it all. Something deeper than politics, deeper than money, deeper than borders or power. One day, he would find that answer. The buses arrived the following morning. The teachers led the children out of the shelter in careful lines. Their faces were pale with exhaustion, yet none of them showed fear. Outside, the air smelled of smoke, ashes, and hot metal. Before boarding, Oskar walked over to Mr. Vladimir, his physical education teacher. Without saying much, he embraced him. Then he placed the keys to his apartment into the teacher's hand.
If you can,
Oskar said quietly.
please take Grom.
For an entire week, the dog had been alone, hiding inside the apartment, waiting for his family to come home. Oskar knew how much Mr. Vladimir loved animals. If anyone could save Grom, it was him. The teacher closed his fingers around the keys and gave a silent nod. No promises. None were needed. Moments later, Oskar climbed aboard the last bus, holding his backpack tightly against his chest. When the convoy finally pulled away, he never looked back. The city he had grown up in no longer existed. Ahead lay only the unknown. Yet for the first time in many days, he felt he was moving toward something instead of simply running from it. Snow-covered fields drifted past the windows. Burned-out military vehicles stood abandoned beside shattered roads. Bent road signs leaned at impossible angles. Elderly villagers stood silently along the roadside, watching the endless columns of refugees disappear into the distance. Oskar's body remained untouched. His soul did not. It felt hollow, yet somewhere inside that emptiness, something new had quietly begun to grow. Several hours later, the convoy reached a regional city farther from the front. The difference was almost surreal. Barely 50 kilometers separated the two places, yet here the air still carried the scent of peace. People walked through the streets without panic. Cars moved through intersections. Shops remained open. The ground no longer trembled beneath constant bombardment. Only the distant wail of an occasional air raid siren reminded everyone that the war had not disappeared. It had merely moved farther away. Mrs. Ludmila gently urged Oskar to stay with the rest of the school. The teachers and students had been given several large rooms inside a kindergarten where they could finally sleep in real beds. Volunteers welcomed them warmly, served hot meals, and did everything they could to restore a small piece of normal life. They wanted to remain together, to support one another, to preserve whatever fragments of their old world still remained. But Oskar knew he couldn't. Every familiar street, every familiar face, every ordinary conversation only reminded him of everything he had lost. He needed to keep moving, not because he was afraid, because something inside him demanded it. The war had taken his home. It had taken his family, but it had failed to take away his will to move forward. For a brief moment, he thought about his cousin Kira, who lived in another city near the border. They had met only once as children and had barely spoken since. He didn't even know her phone number. The thought disappeared almost as quickly as it had come. There was no point traveling toward another place where the same nightmare was unfolding. Instead, he listened to the volunteers. European countries were opening their borders to refugees. Every day, trains and buses carried thousands of people westward. Some were traveling to relatives. Some were heading toward complete uncertainty. Some simply wanted to survive. It wasn't a carefully planned decision. It felt more like an instinct. One quiet certainty remained. He had to keep walking forward, toward whatever path awaited him. Saying goodbye turned out to be harder than he expected. He shook hands with his classmates. He thanked every teacher. Mrs. Ludmila embraced him for a long moment before letting go. Even Angelica seemed close to tears. That surprised him most of all. She had never returned his feelings back at school, yet now she looked genuinely sad to see him leave. His childhood friend Vladislav, however, smiled.
"You always wanted to see the world,"
he said.
"Now you finally will.
He clapped Oskar on the shoulder.
And whenever you need me, you know where to find me."
Old misunderstandings no longer mattered. The petty arguments, the school rivalries, the grudges that once felt so important. All of them had vanished. Enemies became friends. Resentment gave way to compassion. The war had changed more than adults. In only a single week, children had grown older by years. The tragedy that engulfed the country revealed another side of human nature. People shared the last of their food, their blankets, their medicine, their warm clothes. Strangers helped strangers without asking for names. Even those who had almost nothing left still found ways to support someone else. The highways stretched endlessly ahead, packed with cars and buses. Kilometer after kilometer. Millions of people were leaving behind their homes, their memories, and the lives they had built, with no idea whether they would ever return. For most of the journey, Oskar simply stared through the window. Time no longer felt real. Past and future seemed to dissolve into one endless road. The trip lasted several days. With every passing kilometer, exhaustion settled deeper into his body. Yet, strangely, his mind had never felt clearer. Along the way, small miracles quietly appeared. A woman he had never met shared the last of her homemade lunch with him. Another refugee silently draped a warm scarf over his shoulders before walking away without saying a word. Simple acts, small kindnesses. But each one reminded him that even in a world consumed by destruction, light still existed. At last, the convoy reached a refugee camp. The former sports complex had been transformed into a temporary shelter. Rows of folding cots stretched across the gymnasium. Stacks of humanitarian supplies lined the walls. Hundreds of exhausted people filled every corner of the building. Volunteers barely stopped moving. They handed out food, helped families search for missing relatives, found places for new arrivals to sleep. Wherever Oskar looked, he saw the same expression. Eyes emptied by grief. Eyes deprived of sleep. Eyes still trying to believe tomorrow would come. Near one wall, a little boy sat alone. He was quietly crying, clutching an old toy car against his chest. Oskar walked over without saying a word. He reached into his backpack and took out the last piece of chocolate he had saved during the journey. Then he held it out. The boy looked up, carefully accepted it, and began eating in silence. Oskar sat down beside him. Neither of them spoke. They simply remained there together. For the first time in what felt like forever, Oskar smiled. A small smile, almost invisible, but real. He wasn't alone. He was alive. And he still had the strength to help someone else. Sometimes, silence said more than words ever could. That night, exhaustion finally claimed him. Oskar lowered himself onto a chair against the shelter wall. The voices around him faded into a distant murmur. Within moments, he was asleep. And then there was light. He stood in the middle of an immense square surrounded by soaring white marble colonnades. Above him rose a magnificent golden dome that shimmered beneath a cloudless sky. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, slow, clear, and impossibly peaceful. The Vatican. Hundreds of people crossed the square around him. Some talked quietly, others hurried past, disappearing into the endless stream of movement. Most of their faces were blurred, hidden behind a veil of soft light. But one face was perfectly clear. His mother. Victoria Gross stood only a few steps away, smiling. Her fair hair glowed in the warm sunlight, and her gentle blue eyes held the same quiet kindness he had carried with him all his life. Just seeing her filled him with a warmth he had thought was gone forever. She reached out her hand. For one impossible moment, Oskar believed he could touch her. He stepped forward. Their fingertips almost met. Then her figure dissolved into the crowd.
Mom!
He rushed after her, weaving through strangers, calling her name again and again. But every face became another face. Every voice blended into a single, endless whisper. The crowd swallowed her completely. Then he heard her voice. Not ahead of him, behind him.
Oskar, don't be afraid, my boy.
He turned so quickly he nearly lost his balance. She was standing there once more, just as beautiful, just as real. Her smile carried the warmth of home.
You know why I always loved architecture?
She asked gently. Oskar could only stare.
Because truly beautiful buildings outlive the people who create them.
She looked toward the vast square surrounding them.
They remain long after we're gone. They preserve our dreams, our faith, our stories.
Only then did Oskar truly notice where he was. He stood in the heart of St. Peter's Square. The endless marble colonnades embraced the plaza like ancient guardians. High above them, the great dome of St. Peter's Basilica shone beneath the golden morning sun. His voice trembled.
Mom, you're alive.
Tears filled his eyes.
I'm so happy to see you.
She smiled with the same smile he could never forget.
I live here,
She placed a hand gently over his heart.
and that is enough.
Her fingertips brushed his cheek with such tenderness that he forgot he was dreaming.
I'm proud that you're alive, and I'm proud that you're free.
She held his gaze.
Don't look back, Oskar. Your journey has only just begun. Go where your heart is leading you. Make your dream become reality.
Her voice grew quieter with every word, as though the wind itself was carrying it across the square. Yet every sentence remained inside him, alive, true, eternal. A hand suddenly touched his shoulder. Oskar drew a sharp breath and opened his eyes. For a moment, the dream still clung to him. The golden sunlight, the distant bells, his mother's voice fading into the wind. Then, a soft female voice pulled him back.
Hey, are you all right?
Oskar blinked and raised his head. A young woman stood in front of him. There was kindness in her eyes, though exhaustion showed in the faint smile on her face.
Yeah,
He said sleepily.
I'm fine.
You look completely worn out.
She glanced toward the rows of beds behind her.
We still have a few places free. Come on, you need proper rest.
Oskar straightened in the chair and rubbed his eyes.
Thanks. I must have fallen asleep for a minute.
He hesitated, then looked up at her again.
Actually, could you help me with something?
I can try.
I need to get to Rome, to Italy. Do you know how I could get there?
Rome.
Her eyebrows lifted.
You don't exactly look like a gladiator. What's waiting for you there?
A quiet laugh escaped him.
Who knows? Maybe I was one in another life.
Then his expression grew serious.
To be more precise, I need to reach the Vatican.
Ah,
She nodded thoughtfully.
well, that changes everything.
She folded her arms and considered the question.
Refugees can travel free on many trains across Europe right now. Do you have someone there? Family? Friends?
Oskar shook his head.
No, no one.
He paused.
But I have to go.
The young woman studied him for several seconds, as if trying to understand what could make someone cross half a continent with no family waiting at the other end. At last, she nodded.
I understand. A lot of people are trying to begin again somewhere else.
She glanced toward the volunteers moving between the beds.
I'll help you find a route. First, a bus can take you to the station. From there, it should be much easier.
She reached for her phone, then stopped.
And one more thing. Let me give you my number.
Your number?
Sometimes local volunteers can help with accommodation, paperwork, translation, or simply tell you where not to go.
A tired smile touched her lips.
If you need anything, send me a message.
Thank you.
There was something different in Oskar's voice now, a steadiness that had not been there a few days earlier.
What's your name?
He asked.
Julia Kaminska.
Oskar. Oskar Gross.
A faint smile appeared on his face.
It's good to meet you, Julia. You're very kind. I won't forget this.
He looked at her for a moment.
Maybe we'll meet again someday.
She smiled back.
Life has a strange way of bringing people together.
A few minutes later, Julia returned with her phone still in her hand.
I found it.
Oskar stood.
There's a train tomorrow morning. You'll have to change in Budapest, but after that, the route is fairly straightforward. A bus leaves for the station in 2 hours.
She pointed toward the sleeping area.
Until then, you can rest here. No one will disturb you.
Thank you. Really.
After that, they continued talking. At first, only about the journey, stations, borders, tickets, and the places he would need to change trains. Then, the conversation wandered. They spoke about people they had met, cities they had seen, small memories that seemed unimportant until spoken aloud. They talked about everything and nothing at once. And yet there was something unusual in the ease between them, as though they had known each other far longer than a few hours. When the bus finally arrived, Julia walked with him all the way to the open door.
Good luck, Oskar.
She said softly.
And try not to get lost.
I won't.
He tightened his grip on the strap of his backpack. He climbed onto the first step, then turned back. Julia was still standing there. Oskar took out his phone and slowly entered her number. Beneath it, he typed, Julia Kaminska. Then he pressed save. He could not explain why, but he felt certain of one thing. Their meeting had not been an accident. He couldn't explain why. He simply knew he had to reach Rome. The dreams, the strange coincidences, and the fragments of memory all seemed to fit together like pieces of a puzzle. Everything pointed in the same direction, as though the ancient city itself had been waiting for him all along. The bus rolled quietly through the sleeping streets. Oskar rested his forehead against the cold window and watched the streetlights drift past like distant stars. The steady hum of the engine blended with his thoughts, refusing to let him sleep.
Where is all of this leading? Why me?
The dreams had begun long before the war. They were vivid, unsettling, impossibly real. Years ago, he had even tried to paint them, cities of light, falling stars, and an unseen voice calling his name from somewhere beyond the horizon. Now, they no longer felt like dreams. They felt like memories waiting to be understood. First came his father, standing peacefully beside the sea as though death had never touched him. Then his mother, smiling beneath the colonnades of St. Peter's Square. Both of them had spoken to him. Both had seemed to be trying to tell him something. They were gone, and yet he could still feel them beside him. His thoughts drifted to Grom. He silently hoped that Vladimir Sergeyevich had kept his promise and taken the dog home. The thought of Grom waiting faithfully beside a door that would never open again hurt almost as much as the memories of his own family. Oskar slowly closed his eyes.
Maybe I'm losing my mind. Or maybe I'm only beginning to understand.
The sharp hiss of air brakes broke the silence as the bus pulled into the station. Dim lights reflected across the wet pavement. Travelers stood with worn suitcases and heavy backpacks, while somewhere in the distance a train whistle echoed through the cold night. Oskar stepped outside. The icy air struck his face, driving away the last traces of sleep. He had no idea what awaited him beyond this station. He didn't know whether Rome would answer his questions. He didn't know if he would ever see his home again. But one thing had become absolutely clear. He could not stop now. Something from his dreams was still calling him forward. He adjusted the strap of his backpack and looked up at the electronic departure board. Rome, 7:45, Platform 3. Deep inside, a new feeling flickered to life. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it was something very close. High above the clouds, hidden beyond the smoke of war, a solitary star still burned. For the briefest moment, Oskar thought he saw a faint, circular halo surrounding its light. He tightened his grip on the strap of his backpack and stepped forward. Thank you for listening. Continue the story in the next episode. Subscribe for more from the world of Oskar Gross.